Good evening. Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to tonight's crypto class, which is specifically intended for those who have Validator or Validator Pro eligibility, or whose goal is to obtain Validator eligibility before the launch of the Mosaic blockchain. Before we dive into tonight, there are a couple of announcements I'd like to share with you. One thing is, you might have seen it. I trust that all of you here are following and liking the Mosaic Alpha Hungary, or the Mosaic Alpha Facebook page, because then you would have seen that we posted the great news that the Mosaic Alpha white paper is ready and has been uploaded to the Novalis Prime web office under the Documents menu, so you can find it there. It is available in English. I see that some people have already found it and browsed through it. The other thing is that when we started selling tickets for our third Mosaic Mega event on October 12th, which we are really looking forward to, and every year this is really the crypto event of the year for us, and we are truly putting all our energy into preparing for this day to bring you a very fantastic event. Naturally, not only in appearance but also in content. We informed everyone well in advance to secure their spot because last year we had to stop ticket sales early, and this year we had to stop even earlier, today, as all our tickets are sold out. We hope you manage to secure your spot and will be with us on the 12th, so please do not look for tickets on the Hypersales website or in the web office anymore. And what is related to tonight is our Telegram channel. We have the official Mosaic Project Telegram channel, where today the posts about validations went a bit overboard, despite me writing several times that we are dedicating tonight to this, so it is important to participate and then review these. And we have already answered most of the questions in previous webinars related to validations. We also held a dedicated Q&A session on the topic of validations, where the guys, after I read them, I know that we always provide answers to all questions, and we stayed until all the questions were answered. The questions have decreased, but I want to emphasize that our Telegram channel is not customer service. However, it seems that writing there to ask questions at customer service or during the Q&A session is in vain, as we will answer them then as well. Furthermore, the document we upload to the web office is regularly updated with the questions that arise, and we supplement it with additional information. After that, we upload a new version, which includes the version number. So you can see that it is a more recent version. Therefore, it is worth checking the version number to see which one you have and compare it to the newly uploaded version. Occasionally, take another look at the document repository. Today, as you have seen, we have two presenters, both of whom you know. You have certainly met Attila Vidakovics many times, and likewise, hello to you, and also many times with Joseph Pentek, who is our project manager. He was the one, hello Jotzi, who has previously dealt with validations, or the presentation of Mosaic Alpha, or the integration of the wallet with Alpha, etc. He was the one who presented all of these to you, and he was also the one when we gave a presentation on validation and showed you the configuration we recommend and why we recommend it. That was him too. So, Attila and I discussed that we should hold this evening and cover the topic of validation as soon as possible after the boat trip. On one hand, as the blockchain launch approaches, everyone is naturally getting more excited, which is completely understandable, and more questions are arising. However, we still ask you to be a little patient. As we mentioned, we have created a separate list, so on one hand, we have our newsletter list, and on the other hand, we have filtered out the validators separately, and newsletters will be sent specifically to the validators at that moment. The first one will be sent right after this training session. Once we download this video, upload it to our YouTube channel, and translate it into English and Chinese. We will then send it to our partners, that is, those who currently have Validator or Validator Pro eligibility. We continuously update this Validator email database. And as new information becomes available and we move forward, you will always receive these updates in the newsletter. I always say that it's important to check that you have entered your email address correctly and that you have provided the email address you actually use. I emphasize this because there are often misunderstandings. If you don't receive an email, check your spam folder and move it from there if necessary. If you still can't find it, feel free to contact customer service, and we will check if there is any issue. Sometimes someone might have marked it but then turned it off, or didn't mark it at all. Or there might be a technical problem on our end. We will resolve these issues to ensure you receive all the information. I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll hand it over to Attila. When we were on the ship, we had 2 meetings with our leaders from Hungary, and 1 separate meeting with our Czech partners. The reason we had 2 meetings was because there were significantly more of us from Hungary, and we answered everyone's questions there as well. We also discussed validation, the process of validation, and its details. We outlined some things to the leaders, but based on the questions and reactions that came up there, we decided to make some changes. It's important, and we shared this with those who were on the ship, that everyone should be here today because there are some changes compared to what they heard there, and these changes are based on your feedback. So I will step back into the background here, and I will hand over the floor to you, and I would appreciate it if you could share this information.
Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Before we get into how validation has developed, how it has changed, and what the reasons are for this, I learned something this afternoon that I have to say surprised me a little. Not a lot, just a little. But I have to bring it up because I can't keep it to myself. We were on the boat, and only those who had already accomplished something could come on board. Those who bring something to the table, I assume, are serious people and take the business seriously because they are working on it. Those who loaf around and are idle won't get there. But there are still things that, in my eyes, do not align with the diligent attitude it was mentioned. Sorry, something just popped up here that distracted me. Sorry. So we were talking about how the tokenomics is shaping up when we will publish it, which is completely valid. I think if there's something we should be ashamed of, it's that the tokenomics hasn't been published yet. There's obviously a reason for this, and when we outlined this reason with Petty, we started talking about the simulation, what results there are, what differences there are with different changes, and we also said that we should never, ever publish these simulation results or talk about them, because that's what everyone will be expecting. And on the one hand, we can only perform the simulation using historical data, meaning we can simulate events from past history, and then we apply some probability multiplier to each event. Look at how they occurred in the past, what types of participants came to a blockchain, and we can start from there. If we examine many such cases, the probability increases that the tokenomics will become better and better in quality. And I gave an example there of what differences exist with different changes. By the way, we were just talking about how big the reward will be in a block, and there are some really interesting things in it, like if we reduce the reward in the blocks, then obviously, within a certain limit, the time it takes for the investment to pay off for those who purchased validator eligibility decreases. Yes, I just mentioned the numbers there as well, when I mentioned the numbers, with the condition that this should not be told to anyone. Sudi then asked to speak and explained for at least 5 minutes how important it was that it should not get out. But what happened? Now, as far as I know, these numbers were mentioned in an online presentation. Honestly, I'm a bit sad that it happened this way. This has happened before. What we can do from now on is that in any similar case, We won't be able to release any numbers. We won't say anything because these numbers, these can only cause trouble in such a case on one hand. If someone looks at this from the outside, it seems completely amateurish to promote a system with such numbers. Look at the world. Any serious company is. You won't find anyone who makes predictions about their own value for the future. The other thing is that this is indeed a so far. When conveying quality information, if numbers resulting from such a simulation are mentioned, then from that point on, it is no longer quality. So if you are facing a professional, they will not take you seriously from that point on. Thirdly, it's a very bad situation for the business that such numbers are going out. And it's not specific about what the number was, but rather who is going with such a number. By the way, the other thing is that we discussed it, and there weren't that many of us. Everyone has been repeatedly and emphatically asked not to communicate these things, especially in online videos and online presentations. Well, that happened. Okay, let's move on now. I've said what I wanted to say about it. Let's see what the situation is about the reward distributions. When we explained how it would work during the first presentation, it was indicated that it wasn't completely clear. And during the second presentation, it seemed to scare some of you. And you started to worry about what would happen and how things would turn out. By the way, I should add that the final result, how much you will earn, absolutely does not change, so it will be the same then as it is now. However, Petty quickly coordinated with BG about what options there are and how much work it would be to transform it. And BG said that it would be easy to transform. Additionally, there is a potential partner with whom things are in progress, and if this partnership comes together, there will be a technological solution that will require adjustments to other details anyway. The situation is that it can be transformed very easily, and it will be transformed. It might be that the transformation has already started, so it will be transformed. So now I'll tell you how the new version will look, and this will be the final version. The reward distributions, those for each session. We will describe the terminology later. Because it is not fixed yet, we have several types of sessions, and we will not have multiple types of sessions. Now I am talking about the session when the 250 validators are selected, who will validate the next 250 blocks in the following session. When selected, it will be determined, based on those who have been chosen, how many mosaic coins will surface in that session, meaning the newly issued mosaic coins, and from that point on everyone will validate the same amount, and everyone will receive rewards in proportion to what was calculated and determined by the algorithm at the beginning of the 250 session. So, they will receive rewards in proportion to their validator when they validate. For regular POS validators, everyone gets the same amount, while for depositors, it's proportionally higher. And if there is a seat in the depositor validator, then it's even higher there. But now, what happens if within this session, a new validator can come into play under 250 blocks, or, in other words, the ratio in the total number of validators can change. There is nothing predetermined at the beginning, and at the start of each session, it is defined how much will be distributed, and from that point on, it does not change during the 250 session period. However, when a new group of 250 starts, it is calculated again at the very beginning. What does this bring? Everyone will validate the same number of times, but the rewards will not be the same. But now the situation is that it's this simple. So as shown in the previous model on the ship, it's very fortunate that this can be easily converted. We don't really see any disadvantages because with everything calculated at the beginning of each session, it solves problems that might have caused issues in another situation. So, I don't have much more to say about this. There will be documentation. There will be professional technical documentation. and there will also be a simple description. So I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I am happy to hand over the floor to Sudi or Jotsi. If there are any questions, I am here now, but I won't be able to stay until the end. So if you have any questions for me, please ask them now.
Sorry, I'm just checking in the meantime. But I have a question because it's very important for me to arrange the internet. What is the minimum internet speed required for the validator machine? I think Jotsi will explain everything. Now, we've already talked about this, but, of course, we're trying to summarize everything for you. Now, and on one hand, we hope that those who are here have taken notes. But this video will be uploaded just like the previous ones, and you can watch it anytime. So, it's worth browsing the video library in your web office, because every single video and training session is uploaded under separate tabs. There is a separate CryptoClass tab, and you will always see the latest content there. The topic is always named, the presenters are listed, and the date when the video was made is also provided to help you find it more easily. But let's move on here, as the main point is that we mentioned there are two parts that we will discuss in separate presentations, the operating system and the topic of the USB drive. We will return to this, as I mentioned at the beginning, as we progress. There will be more and more information, and we always strive to provide you with these insights to share immediately. And as we have done before, we will hold another session on this topic when we see that you are not asking questions that we have already answered and are included in the completed videos, but rather relevant, completely different questions. In that case, as I mentioned, we will always expand the document, which we usually do together with Jotsi, so we do it here. Additionally, this is also available in English. Furthermore, if we see that there are indeed questions that we have not yet answered, we will organize another Q&A session. If anyone feels that we have not been able to answer their question, they can write to customer service. That's what we are here for, and we will answer them as best as we can. We always consult with experts if it is something that the Novalis customer service cannot answer. But in every case, we will send the response. So, Adi, I thank you very, very much. And now I would like to hand over the floor to Jotsi Pentek, who, as I mentioned, is the project manager for Mosaic. And thank you very much, Jotsi, for being here. We will now go over the entire process again, starting from the configuration to the bandwidth. It's no secret that whatever you sent here, today, yesterday, or what I've gathered over the past period, I've compiled these alongside the material prepared by Jotsi, so we will definitely cover those as well. Feel free to ask any other questions you might have, but I can't promise that we will be able to answer all of them right now, as this is not a Q&A session. I will answer what I can in writing here. And for those that require more detail, we will look into them after Jotsi's presentation, and try to answer those as well.
Thank you very much indeed, and a warm welcome to everyone today. I would like to share some information about validator nodes, some important requirements about the validator nodes. There was a similar presentation a few weeks ago, so I don't want to repeat everything. A lot was covered in that video. Suggests that those who haven't watched it yet do so. It might be worth rewatching to ensure that everyone has all the important information before purchasing the validator machines. Of course, I will still cover the most important information, but I would rather focus on the details that were not mentioned before, but based on the incoming questions, they seemed relevant and important, so they were also included in the document, which will be available in the expanded version through the web office. First and foremost, it is very important to note that these validator machines are exclusively used for validation known as dedicated hardware, and they should not be used for other activities. Using them for other purposes can limit their capacity and cause issues during validation, as the entire capacity of the device must be dedicated to validation. Therefore, installing other programs, such as computer games, or using it as an office computer is not allowed and not recommended, as it could jeopardize the validation process. The documentation available in the web office includes recommended configurations. These are the configurations that we have tested, and during the testing, we found them to be of good quality and relatively easy to install without requiring any special complications. Therefore, we recommend procuring these. Various informational materials and guides will be prepared for these to facilitate the installation process. But right now, I would like to talk about the specific characteristics of the computer configurations we recommend. When it comes to the motherboard, it is important to choose the Gigabyte E760M motherboard if possible, because BIOS settings can vary between motherboards and need to be configured before installation. With certain motherboards, you may encounter serious complications. During the installation process, these issues are not unsolvable. They can pose a challenge, even for a system administrator, to ensure that the installation proceeds correctly and without any complications later on. Therefore, we try to choose a motherboard that is of good quality, has easily manageable I/O settings. Unfortunately, we encountered some motherboards that were quite difficult to work with, and we ultimately decided that this motherboard would be the one we proceed with. We also optimized the installation process for it. So practically, this will be the motherboard the process has been thoroughly tested. And there is a very, very low chance of complications occurring, but we can wholeheartedly recommend it and support it in this regard. For memory, it is important that the device has 32 gigabytes of memory. It might be worth choosing 2 by 16 gigabytes. Memory modules. In this case, if one of them fails, you only need to replace that one, and the other can stay at home in the meantime, but 1 by 32 gigabytes is also completely adequate. It is very important to choose DDR4 memory, because this motherboard also supports DDR4 memory, so this will definitely be the best option. In terms of assembly, ease of operation, for storage, SSD disks will be needed. We recommend acquiring 2 1 terabyte disks, so a total of 2 terabytes of storage will be required. Here, the question may arise about what happens if someone wants to choose a cheaper, older solution like an HDD. We strongly advise against this due to its slowness and unreliability compared to an SSD. Therefore, we should definitely aim to acquire an SSD. Regarding processors, this recommended configuration includes an Intel Core i5 12th generation processor. It is a 6-core, 12-thread processor, and if someone chooses this exact model, it also includes a processor cooler, so no additional cooling is needed. Therefore, it is not necessary to install an additional case cooler. In this situation, of course, if someone really wants to, there is no obstacle, feel free to do so, but it is not necessary. Additionally, this processor includes an integrated graphics unit, so a separate video card is not needed to display the output and graphical interfaces on our monitor. The setup is practically functional. With this processor, if someone chooses this or another processor with an integrated graphics unit, there is no need to purchase a separate video card. For the case, we recommended 2 AIGO models. Both have good ventilation, are adequately sized, and can fit everything. For the power supply, we recommend a 700 watt thief tag or big fire power supply. Here, it is advisable to choose the 700 watt version rather than the 500 watt version. For example, here you basically need to consider that a 500 watt power supply will probably work fine, but it depends on how much you push the power supply. Practically, a 700 watt unit can operate much more reliably under relatively smaller loads than a 500 watt unit if we push it to its limits. So practically, 700 watt one might be a better choice. In the long run, firstly, as I mentioned, it is not used under constant high load, so you don't have to deal with voltage fluctuations. Under high load, additionally, if the machine needs to be upgraded later, it will be able to handle at load as well. Overall, it is much more efficient to operate our device with a 700 watt power supply and with a 500 watt one. This document includes some specific recommendations on what to choose, but for a 700 watt power supply, anything else would also be suitable. And computer stores that also handle assembly, customers often ask if a pre-installed operating system is needed for the machine. For an additional fee, the operating system can essentially be purchased and even installed on the spot. Here, it is not necessary, and in fact, having a pre-installed operating system on the machine complicates the validation process even more because it would have to be removed anyway, and the operating system we prepared for the validator's research would need to be installed. So practically, you don't need to request an operating system on the SSD, meaning you don't need to install anything. It is much simpler if everyone installs the operating system themselves from scratch on the empty machine, following the instructions, as it is a relatively straightforward process. This was the computer configuration that I introduced in a bit more detail last time. Now, I will show you another computer configuration. We put this together practically after the last occasion because there was a demand. Or what if someone wants to choose a slightly more expensive, exclusive version? And then they will also have the option. I would like to note that this is the number one configuration, and it is more than sufficient for validation. So anyone who has already purchased this has made a good buy and will not be at a disadvantage compared to someone who chose, for example, the second option. However, if someone is interested in putting together a more expensive configuration, we would like to show them an alternative as well. For the motherboard, we also stuck with the same gigabyte model that I described above and mentioned earlier. The only modification to the RAM compared to the previous one is that a different type of Kingston memory module is recommended here. This is a premium category memory with additional cooling. Here, I also recommend a total of 32 gigabytes as a minimum requirement. Instead of a Kingston SSD, this one has a Samsung SSD, and various tests have concluded that it is 17% faster compared to the Kingston. This was demonstrated in different tests. Here, the processor in this configuration is specifically a 14th generation Intel i5 processor. The previous one has a 12th generation This one has a 14th generation. This means that for this machine, a BIOS update will definitely be needed, or those who are used to doing it and know how can update it themselves, because it will be necessary for the 14th generation processors. Here, it achieved 34% higher performance in various synthetic tests. Once again, this does not necessarily mean that it provides a significantly greater advantage, but on paper, this performance increase was noticeable compared to the 12th generation version. The case is a Zalman P30, which has a different design. It's a matter of personal taste what someone prefers. And theoretically, it has a quieter design. For the power supply, we recommend the ChiefTech 700W GPS 700A8 model. It is also important here that the machine does not have a pre-installed operating system, and the retail price of this configuration is $270 to $275,000 forints net, at least around the end of July. It could be obtained at this price from various sellers. The third alternative is a pre-assembled machine. If someone does not want to have the components assembled piece by piece or assembled in themselves, they can choose this option as well. This is practically such that you can pick it up, assembled from the store shelves, and purchase it. Here, it is very important to note that this Lenovo Team System ST50V2 server runs in several configurations. The difference often lies in the article number, where even a single letter can be significant, as well as the amount of GB we see, which refers to the memory capacity. Pay attention to the 32 gigabytes memory here as well. It is also noted here that, for example, there is a 16 gigabytes version of this, which, in this case, will not be sufficient. If someone has purchased this, they need to buy another identical 16 gigabytes memory module to match the one already inside, and then expand it by adding it, which means they will have to modify the device afterwards. So always make sure that the item number matches the one listed here. I won't go into detail about the other components, considering that they are already assembled, so we don't have any particular tasks with them. This reminds me that it is also important for the previous components, such as the processor and the RAM, that the differences in the article numbers often indicate differences as well. For example, there are processors that do not include an integrated graphics unit. If someone chooses such a configuration, they will also need to take care of the graphics card separately. So it is important to make sure that we choose something that will really be suitable. So here, for example, an additional letter can mean a different version. For example, with memory, there can be cases where the part number is different, because instead of a single 16 gigabytes module, there are two modules packaged together, and they are sold under a different part number. So it's always important to carefully check the description to know exactly what you are purchasing. It is advisable to show this description or explain what we want at the store that deals with assembly, just to make sure we buy the right components. And while we are there, it is worth having the assembly done as well, because the technicians there usually have the experience and routine in this, so they are likely to achieve better results than if we were to try assembling it ourselves. Of course, if someone enjoys tinkering and has experience doing it, they can go ahead, but it might be worth entrusting this to those who frequently handle it as part of their job. As I mentioned last time, You can deviate at your own risk if you think this is not very good, but we can provide technical support in the above cases, as we have tested these and know the smallest details of where and what kind of problems might occur. Actually, the most critical component is the motherboard itself, but it is also recommended to opt for higher quality, as lower quality machines can have lifespan issues. A cheaper model can lead to faster failures, and in the case of a malfunctioning machine, the device can be excluded from validation. This means that the owner of the validator, as well as those who chose this validator for NFTX staking, can be penalized if the device fails during validation. We will discuss the penalties further, as there have been questions related to this. So, it is definitely worth noting that saving 1 to 2,000 forints by opting for cheaper options may not be worthwhile, as it can lead to downtimes in the long run. I've already talked a lot about the motherboard, so I won't go into detail here. In fact, I mentioned it last time as well. These are the ones you should definitely stick to even if you don't want to choose one of the 3 configurations mentioned above. Of course, we recommend choosing one of those 3, but if you decide to deviate, do so with this knowledge in mind. There are some configurations that we do not recommend or support, and these appear here under the name prohibited configurations. These are practically the ones that violate the principle of decentralized operation and also pose a risk to the owner of the validator. So practically, for these 2 considerations, we cannot support them. And in these cases, we cannot provide technical support for operation. What are these? Last time, I went into detail about why we do not recommend these. Now, I would like to touch on them only in a list format. We do not support running multiple validators on a single physical machine, which means that we effectively enforce multiple validator rights on one computer, and multiple validators run on the same physical machine. This causes various problems, and we do not recommend or support it at all. The same applies to placing with any service provider, as this significantly violates the principle of decentralization. Practically, if there is any downtime at the service provider, then all the validators there can go down. This is not healthy for anyone, so we cannot support placement with any service provider, including here cloud services, such as the installation of virtual machines in the cloud, DPS. Similar solutions are not supported. Similarly, we cannot wholeheartedly support placement in the server farm. That's all about the prohibited configurations. And what I would continue with is the factors needed to get our devices up and running. The most basic requirement is essentially access to electrical power, and in case of power outages, it is advisable to use an uninterruptible power supply. When it comes to capacity, you should choose a device that can handle, well, not a 700 watt load, but a 500 to 600 watt load for about 20 to 30 minutes. Practically, such long power outages are not significant. There are no significant long power outages, so it is not really worth choosing an uninterruptible power supply for longer periods. Practically, this 20 to 30 minute transfer time can be adequate. Make sure that during this time, you not only connect the validator machine, to the uninterruptible power supply, but also your internet source, because it's pointless that the machine is running, but if you cannot connect to the internet, you will not be able to propose a block to the blockchain, so make sure to connect your modem, router, switch, or any network device you use to an uninterruptible power supply. Additionally, if we know that there will be a planned power outage, it is advisable to put our validator in chill mode during that time. This means that while in chill mode, the validator is resting and will not receive rewards during that time since it will not be validating. However, this indicates in advance that it will not be available. For example, after a power outage, it can be switched back to active mode, and from that point on, validation can continue. The validator can then rejoin the group that is producing the next blocks, meaning it can potentially propose the next block. So, chill mode can be useful in such cases. It also protects against penalties. A validator in chill mode cannot receive penalties, but of course, they also cannot receive rewards. For example, when moving, if someone is relocating their computer, it is advisable to put it in chill mode during that time. This way, they won't receive any penalties. And once the move is complete, and they can safely operate their computer again, they can switch it back to active mode. This ensures that the money placed in the validator won't be affected